We're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 7. That's where we left off last time. I didn't really, I don't often think about trying to coordinate what I'm speaking about with the relevant day of the year. I have been known to speak on the book of Genesis on Christmas and other days. But the nice thing is the book of Genesis has everything from the rest of Scripture in it, because all of this, the Bible is connected together. There's all these different references of different parts of the Bible. So you can always find something about Palm Sunday or Easter, wherever you want to look in the Bible. So I'm sure there's something about that here in this message today. So we left off talking last time with the flood. And so all of creation was destroyed, and things are almost back to the way they were at the beginning of creation. You might remember in the creation story at the very beginning, it says the world was covered by the deep. And if you read in Genesis chapter 7, in verse, let's see, which one is this? In verse 11, Genesis 7:11, that on this particular day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. So now the great deep is returning. It covered the world at the beginning. God had put it in its place and made a nice world for humanity to live in, but humanity had corrupted that world. So now the great deep is coming back and it's flooding the world. It also says the windows of heaven were open. So you might remember in the creation story, God separated the waters above and the oceans from the waters above in the sky. And now that separation is being undone. So just like humanity made no distinction between good and evil, they mixed everything together, they corrupted the earth. Now God is saying, okay, you will live in a world now where there's no longer these distinctions. There's no longer any order. So the waters above and the waters below are coming back together, and the world is being returned in some ways to the state that it was before it was created. So it's very sad. But of course, there's one good thing in this whole disastrous story, and that's that Noah was found grace in the eyes of God. And so God had mercy on Noah. He told him to build an ark, and he rescued Noah and his family and all these animals in the ark. And we read that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And we keep reading over and over again about Noah's obedience, how he did just like God commanded him. That's what he did. That's, for example, chapter 6, verse 22. Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. So Noah is obedient. But we also saw last time, if you remember, that Noah's obedience actually wasn't quite 100% perfect. He delayed doing what God told him to do. God told him 7 days before the flood, this is in Genesis chapter 7 and verse 1, come into the ark, you and all your household. And we read that he says in verse 4, after 7 more days, I will send the flood. So God told Noah to go in, but Noah didn't go in right away, because in verse 11, it says, in the same day that the fountains of the great deep were broken open, the windows of heaven were opened. In verse 12, the rain was on the earth. And then we read in verse 13, on the very same day. So it's very careful to let us know it's on this very same day. That's when Noah entered the ark. So he just barely made it. All right. He just barely got in right as the rains was coming, instead of right away like God had told him. So there's already some, if you're paying careful attention to this story, you already see that there's some problem potentially with Noah. Now, we might be hoping God's going to restart the world with this new Noah. And this time things are going to turn out differently. This time Noah will obey God. This time we'll have a nice, perfect world. But that's not what we're going to see. In fact, what we're going to see is a lot of repetition. So this might jog your memory from some of the things we talked about in some of these earlier chapters in Genesis. So we're going to see a repetition of a lot of the things from earlier appearing now in the life of Noah. So Noah's in the ark, and if we read about it let's see, this is in chapter 8, verse 2, the fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain was restrained. So God is once again restoring the order that he put in place at the beginning of creation. And we read then in, let's see, this is in chapter 8, verse 1. So going back a little bit, the Lord remembered Noah and every living thing that and all the animals that were with him on the ark. Now, this doesn't mean that God forgot about Noah. It's just emphasizing for us. God remembered Noah. He didn't forget about him. He also doesn't forget about us. But God remembered Noah and everything that was with him on the ark, and the Lord God made a wind to pass over the earth. Now, at the very beginning of the creation story, we read, the Spirit of God was over the face of the waters. But in Hebrew, the word spirit and wind are the same. So God's wind is once again over the waters, just like it was during the original creation. And God puts the deep back in its place, and he makes a dry place for the ark. Now, it doesn't happen very quickly. If the days of the month are listed for us here, and they're listed for a reason. If you go through this and pay attention to which days happen, that the rain happens for, I think, 40 days, and then the waters are receding for some amount of time. And Noah eventually in chapter 8, verse 6, opens up the windows of the ark, and he sends out these birds, and he waits a week, and he sends out another bird. And they come back, or sometimes they don't come back. And he's trying to find out, is the ground dry? Is it safe to come out? And you can imagine him waiting here, wondering, has God really remembered me? He's stuck here on this ark, waiting and waiting and waiting for months. And then at the end of the day, it wasn't any of Noah's efforts that told him that it was safe to go out of the ark, right? When the dove goes and doesn't come back, Noah doesn't say, okay, I guess it's fine to go out. He keeps waiting. And then finally, he looks for himself. He sees that the ground is dry, but he still waits. And then finally, in verse 15 of chapter 8, God spoke to Noah and said to him, go out of the ark, you, your wife, and your sons wives with you, and bring out every living thing. He lists these all out. And he says, bring them out so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. And then finally, in verse 18, Noah went out, his wife and his son's wife. So I think it was several months passed between when he sent out these doves and when God finally told him to go out of the ark. Maybe it was just 1 month. It was a long time. So Noah had to be patient and wait on the Lord. But God brought him out. And now we have all these living creatures, and they're ready to be fruitful and multiply again. This is what we heard in the original creation story. God blessed the animals and told them to be fruitful and multiply. And you'll notice also that it's very careful listing out all the different types of animals. Everything is according to its kind, orderly, just like it was when God first created the world. Then in verse 20, Noah builds an altar to the Lord. So after God brought him out of the ark, he builds an altar and he offers these animals. And in verse 21, it says, the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Now, the word soothing in Hebrew is the same word as the word for comfort. So when it says God smelled a soothing aroma, remember what Noah's name means? Noah's name means comfort. So God smelled the Noahing aroma, right? He is pleased with Noah, and that's why he accepts his worship. Remember earlier when we talked about Cain? Cain offered something to the Lord, and God didn't receive his worship. Why didn't God receive Cain's worship? Well, God tells him it's because if you do well, you'll be accepted. But if you do not, sin lies at the door. So Cain did not please the Lord, and God did not accept his worship. But Noah, he does accept him. He does say, right, he offers these burnt offerings, but it's not the burnt offerings per se that God is pleased with. He's pleased with Noah and with Noah's obedience. Now, of course, there's a question. How can God be pleased with Noah when Noah isn't actually as perfect as it might seem at first glance? He is not a man who always obeyed the Lord right away. So that's a question that we'll have to take with us going forward. But the Lord is pleased with Noah. He makes eternal agreement with him that he says, while the earth remains, in verse 22 of chapter 8, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. And he later on puts a sign of this covenant. That's in chapter 9 and verse 13. I set my bow in the cloud. And just like in English, where the word bow can mean like the weapon that you shoot arrows with, it's the same thing in Hebrew. So God is hanging up his weapon in the clouds so you can see it's there, it's hung up. He's not going to destroy the earth again with a flood. So there's this covenant and the sign of the covenant. This is the first covenant in the book of Genesis. And it doesn't depend on anything that Noah did. God doesn't say, if you obey me, then I won't destroy the world again with a flood. He just promises Noah, he gives him a free promise. I'm never again going to destroy the earth by a flood. He also sets some other things up in this chapter. Some kind of strange commands are given here. He talks about in verses 3 and 4 that you can eat any living creature. I'm giving them to you for food. So why do we bother talking about this? That God is allowing people now to eat animals and consume them for food. Well, if you remember back at the first creation story, God gave to Adam and Eve every plant, every herb of the field I've given to you for food. Now, also for Noah, God is giving to him. Now it's the animals. He's giving them to him for food. So this is a recreation of the world. God has set Noah up. He's providing him with food. He's given him a covenant, which is something Adam and Eve didn't explicitly have, except maybe if you eat from the tree, you will die. And he also sets a penalty for murder. So he says in chapter 9, verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. And so we're reminded of the fact that God made Adam and Eve in the image of God. We were all created in the image of God. That was God's intention for us. And so we're reminded of that once again, right? As I said, there's a lot of reminders of that original creation story. But there's going to be something different here, because remember what happens after that original creation story. Cain killed his brother Abel. So God is now saying, and God, in that original story, God showed mercy to Cain. He didn't kill him. He gave him some freedom. He gave him some protection even. And now God is saying, no longer. Now there's going to be this penalty for murder. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. And he even makes the connection with Cain and Abel more explicit. At the end of verse 5, he says, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. So we're reminded of the fact that Cain killed his brother Abel. Okay, so will things turn out to be differently? God says in verse 7, be fruitful, multiply. He repeats that blessing, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. So here's a new opportunity. What's going to happen? Well, we can go down and read what happens next in chapter 9 and verse 20. Now, this is a very significant verse. It might not seem so significant to you if you read it in the English. In English, it says, chapter 9, verse 20, Noah began to be a farmer and planted a vineyard. But in Hebrew, the Hebrew word that's used here for farmer is Noah began to be a man of the ground. In Hebrew, that word for ground used here is Adamah. That's what Adam was made of. He was made out of the ground, the Adamah. That's why he was named Adam. Now we read Noah began to be a man of the Adamah, just like his ancestor Adam. And we're going to see that he is going to have something happen to him that's very similar to what happened to Adam. So he plants this vineyard and he becomes drunk and he became uncovered in his tent. That's chapter 9, verse 21. So just like Adam, Noah consumed a fruit. In this case, it was wine, and his nakedness is exposed. Now, we're not told very explicitly about Noah's sin, except that he became drunk in this instance. But we saw that he delayed obeying God earlier. So we know that Noah is not some kind of Messiah, right? He's not some kind of new man who's finally going to get it right this time. He's just like his ancestor, Adam, and he also becomes exposed. And there's then conflict within his family. His son Ham mocks his father, and his other two sons instead cover their father, and so they respect him. And just like Adam's children were cursed, Noah's children also end up cursed, or at least Ham's son Canaan does. And Noah says in verse 25, cursed be Canaan, and he prophesies this conflict between his sons, his children, the descendants of Canaan and the descendants of Shem and Japheth. So just like there was family conflict after the first creation, here we have family conflict again. Well, what did we get next after the story of Cain and Abel? Does anyone remember? If you're reading in your Bible, you might be tempted to skip this part. The next part is the genealogies. And so here again, we also get a genealogy, but not before we get repeated for us a very important fact in chapter 9, verse 29. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. He is still a descendant of Adam, and he's still subject to death. So then we read about the genealogy of all the sons of Noah in chapter 10. And there's all these children listed, and a lot of these children have the names of big nations that were all around the children of Israel. So Noah was the father of nations. Many great peoples came from him. And actually, if you count out the number of nations that are listed in this chapter, I believe the number is 70. Sometimes it's a little complicated which to count and what not to count, but it's about 70 nations that are listed in this chapter. So that number is actually important if we ever get to the end of the book of Genesis. But anyway, 70 nations. So, but it keeps talking about the dispersion. So if we went back a little bit to chapter 9, and we read about Noah's sons, it says, from these, the whole earth was populated in chapter 19. And then in chapter 10, we keep reading things like in verse 5, from these, all the peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands. So we keep reading about this dispersion. And so we read about all these people. Some of the highlights from this genealogy are Nimrod. He's the son of Cush, and he was a mighty one on the earth. He is a mighty hunter, and he founds all of these cities. All right, so Noah's descendants are no slouches. They're powerful people. They are nation builders. They're city builders. It kind of reminds us maybe a little bit about Cain, because remember, he went and built a city after he killed his brother. So we get all these different peoples. We also learn one very interesting fact, and that is in, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it on the fly here, but when Japheth's name is listed, we're told something, that he was the oldest son of Noah. Now, Noah's sons are listed, and the listing order in the scriptures is Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Japheth is always put last in those listings. But now we find out that he's actually the oldest son. So now maybe that doesn't seem very significant, but this kind of a switcheroo happens over and over again throughout the book of Genesis. One of the significant ones coming up is going to be Abraham. So Abram's father was Terah. Terah's sons are listed: Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Abram is listed first, but we later find out that he was not, in fact, you had to do some math to figure this out, but he was not, in fact, the oldest son of Terah. So he was actually the youngest, but why is he listed first? Why is the first listed the last listed first? There's a lot of this switching of the older and the younger son throughout the book of Genesis. So it's just something to pay attention to in the future. But we have all these nations. That's the legacy of Noah. All right, so what's going to happen next? That's chapter 11. And that's the big story in chapter 11. Now, what happens after the genealogy of Adam back in the after we learned about all of Adam's descendants, after we learned about Noah? What came next after the genealogies? Well, that was, if you remember, God was looking down at the people, and he said every intent of the thoughts of their heart was only evil continually. But we were also reading about these people, there were giants on the earth, and they were men of renown. In Hebrew, that expression is men of the name. These were famous people. They had a name for themselves. Now we're going to read about some other people who also wanted to make a name for themselves. So this is in chapter 11, starting in verse 1. The whole earth had one language and one speech. Now that sounds like a very nice thing. They're all one. A lot of times you hear people in the news talk about unity and the importance of unity. Unity is a very good thing. It is something that's close to God's heart. He wants us to be unified. But when some people seem to think that if we could only get rid of all these nations and all these boundaries and all these languages and all come together as one, then all the world's problems will be solved. Well, we just saw that wasn't the case. Before the flood, humanity was united. They were smart, intelligent, well-educated. They had very long lifespans. And what did they do? They used all of that advantage for evil. So now God is going to place some limitations on humanity in order to restrain the evil that they're capable of. So it came to pass in verse 2, as they journeyed from the east, this is chapter 11, verse 2, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had bricks for stone, they had asphalt for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." So there's another city building going on here. "And a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. So once again, God is looking down at humanity, and he doesn't like what he sees. In verse 6, he says, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do." And of course, we know how this is going to end because we just saw it earlier in the story of Adam's descendants. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Now, if you just read that here and didn't know the earlier context, you might think, oh, well, what's the big deal? Nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Well, we know what the big deal is because we read about it earlier. Every intent of the thoughts of their heart was only evil continually. So it's a very bad thing that nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. So God says, and once again, he speaks in the plural, possibly because he is being portrayed as a king, as a sovereign who has his court and his attendants around him. He says, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand each other's speech." And you got to admire the ingenious of this solution, because learning a language is hard, but it's really not an insurmountable barrier. Like if I am not understanding someone's language, we can eventually learn how to communicate with each other. But all God has to do is mix up people's languages, and that they're not going to be able to get along anymore. They're going to divide up into their groups, and they're going to disperse because people are evil and they have a lot of trouble getting along together. So all God had to do is mix up their languages, and he succeeded in scattering them. In verse 8, the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language. And the Hebrew word for confused is Balel, which sounds a little bit like Babel. So he confused their languages, and there God scattered them abroad. And if we pay careful attention in these genealogies, I know they can be a little bit boring, but there's sometimes interesting things in here. You'll notice in the earlier genealogy, we read that the generation where the earth was divided was in the days of Peleg. So Peleg was the son of Eber, and in Peleg's days, the earth was divided. So that seems to be talking about the Tower of Babel. The earth was divided. And if you look at the number of years that people lived in this genealogy that we're about to read, you would see that right after Eber, in the days of Peleg, the lifespan of people became dramatically shorter. So there's this big limitation. People aren't living as long anymore. God is placing limitations on humanity. And so you can read this genealogy. It's very interesting, actually, to add up the number of years and see how long people lived. I think Eber, who is one of the people in this genealogy, like several generations before Abraham, actually outlived Abraham because he had such a long lifespan. So these are still some great people around. Abraham is called a Hebrew. The Hebrew word for that is Eberite. So he was probably that's referring to Eber, saying he was a descendant of Eber. So this was a great person, but we don't really know anything about Eber, right, except that he's mentioned in passing in this genealogy in chapter 11. Because who is the important person in this genealogy? Well, that's Abraham. And if you count up the number of generations, Abraham is the 10th person in his genealogy. Now, who else was the 10th person in their genealogy? If you, right, exactly. Noah was the 10th person in his genealogy, just like Abraham. So Abram is going to be in parallel a little bit here with Noah. So, of course, you remember what happened when we got to Noah. God said, this is it. I'm going to destroy the whole world. So that wasn't great. But Noah was the person through whom all the world was saved. Now we get to Abraham. Is God about to judge the world? Is Abram going to be the one through whom God saves the entire world? Well, we'll find out. But this is where this pattern that we've seen, this repetition from the earlier creation story, gets broken a little bit, because we begin to focus on the life of Abram. And this is, of course, a very important choice, because most of the book of Genesis is talking about Abraham and his children. It's not talking about all these great nations that we just read about. Now, if I looked at any other book, almost all of them are going to be talking about, especially if it's talking about history, it's going to be talking about the great kings, the nations, maybe these big societies and cultures and civilizations. That's what the world is interested in, and that's what we focus on. We like the power, the movers and shakers, so to speak. At least we think that they're the movers and shakers. And we like to focus on the stories of these quote unquote great men, the people who've made a name for themselves. But that's not what the Bible does. The Bible focuses on Abram, seemingly insignificant from the world's perspective, but somehow this is the man who's the most important to God. We've seen already that God has interrupted the cycle of what happens before. God stopped, restrained humanity. So now what is God going to do? How is he going to prevent a repeat of the disaster of the flood and all the evil that man did? Well, God is going to be doing something, and it's not going to be with the nations. It's going to be with this insignificant man named Abram. So this story starts out in chapter 11, verse 27. This is the genealogy, the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. I'm sorry, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. Okay, so a nice, happy family. Not because in verse 28, Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur of the Chaldeans. So that's already death is affecting this family. One of the sons has died. Lot takes in his dead brother's son and adopts him, his nephew Lot. So in verse 29, Abram and Nahor took wives. Okay, so maybe they'll have their own children and make up for this death. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai, and by the way, yeah, it is weird to marry your brother's daughter, even in ancient Hebrew culture. So we're not told yet, but Abram married his sister. So this is a little bit of a foreshadowing of that. We have Haran is also engaging in a forbidden marriage, marrying his niece. And in verse 30, Sarai was barren. She had no child. So this is a family of death. There's a dead relative. There's no children, no new life. Very sad. In verse 31, and Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went to go out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the lands of Canaan. But they didn't make it quite all the way to the lands of Canaan. They came to Haran and dwelt there. Now, the name Haran is the name of the city. It sounds a lot like the name Haran, the son who died. So they're living here in the city of death, no children. It's not looking good. In verse 32, all the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So death, 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 no new life. It's not looking good for this family. But there was something that we weren't told, but that's very significant. So we're going to go back in time in chapter 12, verse 1, goes back in time, and it says, the Lord had said to Abram, and we find out that actually when the Lord spoke this to Abram, he was actually still in Ur of the Chaldeans. I forget which verse we get that from. Maybe that's in the New Testament. But God had spoken to him while he was still in Ur of the Chaldeans. So before he had gone to the city of Haran, God had spoken to him, and this is what he said: get out from your country, from your family, from your father's house, to the lands that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And yes, the word blessed is repeated a lot in these verses. So that sounds great. God said, all you have to do is get out, and I will bless you. So did Abram obey? Well, it seems like he did. In verse 4, we read, Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him. Lot went with him, and he leaves the city of Haran. He takes all the possessions that he had accumulated in Haran, and they depart to go to the land of Canaan. But did Abram obey? If we know, I guess Abram must say this later on in the book of Genesis. If Abram got this command while he was still in Ur, did he obey? Did he leave his family? Did he leave his father's house? No. He went with his father to Haran. They were on their way to Canaan, but they didn't make it there. He stayed in Canaan in Haran until his father, Terah, died. So Abram didn't obey right away. It's another case of delayed obedience, just like Noah earlier and just like some others afterwards. And once again, it's not like drawn to our attention very much. You have to read carefully, and you'll see later that Abraham got this call while he was still in Ur. So, but Abraham went eventually. He went to the place God told him. And we read about his journeys a little bit here. So Abraham's journey is about to be described in this chapters 12 and 13. We will get a complete circle, so to speak. So where does he start out? He starts out in verse 6. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. So Abram's got to this place, but there's some Canaanites there, so it's not free for the taking. And he's at the terebinth tree of Moreh, so remember that name. So then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants, I will give this land. To your descendants. So God had already said, I will make you a great nation. That implies that Abram will have descendants. Now he's more specific. To your descendants, I will give this land. So Abram is definitely being promised descendants here. Although again, it's not like very explicit, but God is hinting at this. I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. In verse 8 of chapter 12. He moved from there to the mountains east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. All right, so now he's between Bethel and Ai. So remember, he was at the terebinth tree of Moreh. Now he's between Bethel and Ai. So that's the second stop in his journey. And there he builds an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him, the Lord who had caused himself to be seen to him. Then in verse 8, he moved from verse 9, Abram journeyed going on still towards the south. So terebinth tree of Moreh. Next is between Bethel and Ai, and now we're in the south. So he's going down, if you trace this on a map. He's going south. And then in verse 10, there was a famine in the land, and so Abram goes even further south. Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. So he leaves the land that God had told him to go to because of the famine. Of course, foreshadowing the time when his descendants are going to go down to Egypt because of a famine. And it comes to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, and here are the very first words of Abram recorded in the scriptures. So the character's first words, it's always very interesting what they reveal about him. So Abram's first words are this: "Indeed, I know you are a beautiful woman." This is in verse 11. "Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it might be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you." Well, I'm not married myself, but this doesn't seem like a very good husband behavior here, saying to your wife, "I'm afraid that I might get killed, so why don't you just lie so that even if you get taken by someone, at least they'll still let me survive." I don't know. I've heard actually that there's a story of this is a bit of a tangent. Genghis Khan, allegedly his mother was kind of in a similar situation where she had just been betrothed, but then some bandits came. And so she just told her husband to skedaddle and run away so that he would survive. And then she ended up getting taken as captive and married to some guy. So apparently, I guess in the violent worlds that Abraham was living in, where there wasn't law and order, so to speak, maybe this was a common practice for a husband to say, "Well, I can't save either of us, so I'll just run away and leave my wife behind, and hopefully at least we'll be able to both keep on living." Not a great commentary on Abram's character. But so he says, "Please lie for me so that it'll be well with me." And it was in verse 14, when Abraham came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And the princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. So here Abram is living it up. Apparently, he still has not, despite these circumstances, warned Pharaoh that Sarai is actually his wife, tried to protect her. So he's benefiting from this, though. So Abraham's scheme seems to be working out pretty well. He's doing well for himself, protecting his own life. But actually, it's going to turn out that God does a better job protecting him than Abram does protecting himself. So God, in verse 17, plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And this, of course, is foreshadowing when God will eventually plague Egypt to bring the children of Israel out. So God plagued Pharaoh's house. And in verse 18, Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me?" There's that question again. God asked it of Eve, "What is this you have done?" And now it's asked of Abram, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here's your wife. Take her and go your way." And Abraham's response isn't recorded here. What do you say in response to those kinds of accusations? So Pharaoh sent him away, and he commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. And so Abram goes out of Egypt. He's rushed out of Egypt with great possessions, just like his descendants are going to be one day. And God protected him. So now what does Abram do? He's descended, if you will, right? He stepped out in faith at the beginning. Faith is when he went to the terebinth tree of Moreh. And then he went down to Bethel and Ai, and then he went down to the south, and then he went all the way down to Egypt. And there Egypt is often, has some not great symbolism. It symbolizes the world or the systems of the world. It was a great civilization, a worldly way of thinking. So in Egypt, Abraham did like everyone else did. He lied and he looked out for himself, even neglecting his wife. So now what is Abraham going to do? Well, let's read it. Why should I tell you when you can just read it? Chapter 13 and verse 3, he went on his journey from the south. Oh, sorry. I should start at verse 1. So Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the south. So they went to the south. Abraham was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold, and he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where he had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. So what is Abraham doing here? He's going backwards. He's retracing his steps. And this is emphasized for us because it's the place where he was at the beginning. And then in verse 4, it makes it even more explicit. To the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord, just like he had done at the same place earlier. So Abram is retracing his steps. He's going back. And he's literally doing this. There's a physically he's going back, but also spiritually, he's returning his attention to the Lord. But there's a little bit of an interruption in this journey here. And in this interruption, Lot separates out from Abraham. He goes to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the things that look really nice to his eyes, the things that he can see, and he goes there. And Abram, meanwhile, goes and he's going to continue his wandering around seemingly aimlessly without any city to dwell in. But God said to Abram in verse 14 of chapter 13, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look. Now from the place where you are, north and south and east and west, for all the land which you see, I will give to you and your descendants forever. And now the promise is made very explicit. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise and walk the land. And the word for walk here is the same word that's used for Enoch. It's a habitual walking, not just, go for a single stroll. Walk habitually in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. So Abram is asked to look with the eyes of faith, right? Lot looked at what he could see. He saw Sodom and Gomorrah. He saw this looks like a really nice place. God now asks Abram, don't look at what is seen. Look at this land. I will one day in the future give it to you and your descendants who he still cannot see. They don't exist yet. I will make them as the dust of the sea. So God is asking Abraham to have faith. So did Abram learn his lesson? Will he trust in God for his protection? Verse 18, Abram moved with his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So he went back to terebinth trees. It's a different terebinth tree, though. It's the terebinth tree of Mamre. He started out at the terebinth tree of Moreh. So does he ever return to this terebinth tree of Moreh? It's never mentioned again, but there is something that sounds a little bit similar. Towards the very end of Abram's journeying, God calls him to go to the land of Moriah. So at the very end, God once again calls Abraham to return to a place of faith. Well, we're out of time now, but if we read the next chapter, we would find out that Abraham really did learn his lesson. He did have faith. In fact, he had enough faith that he was willing to take his 318 men and go chasing after a bunch of kings in order to rescue his nephew. So he really trusted in God then. And you might think, oh, that's great. Abram learned his lesson. But then he has his moments of doubt. So all his life, he's going back and forth between faith and fear, just like us. But we will read in chapter 15 that Abram believed God and God considered it righteousness to him. So God accounted to him righteousness because of his faith. It wasn't a perfect faith, but because he still had his moments of doubt. But somehow God was able to take Abram's faith and consider it righteousness. So that's all the time we have for now. You can continue on in the future in the story of Abraham and his journey. So let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for these stories in your word. And thank you that your wisdom is so much greater than the wisdom of the world, that all these great nations and the things that we think are so great are not important to you, but that you accept a humble heart, that you have taken us, and we're the least of all sinners, and you have taken us and shown us mercy because of our faith in you, and you have mercy on us. And when we fall, you call us to return. And I thank you for all the blessings that you've given to us, every spiritual blessing and every good thing without us deserving it. I thank you for all that you've done for us. Please help us on our journeys to trust in you and to grow closer to you. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.